As it's nearly Halloween, how about we share some creepy stories? I'll go first. I'm not sure how freaky it is, since it's not paranormal or anything, but when I was about 7 years old I went on a walk with my babysitter. We were walking back a mile or so to my house on a fairly busy road, and about halfway there she says we should play Simon Says. At first we walk faster, then skip, and then jog lightly. Then she says Simon Says run as fast as you can. Simon Says turn here. I was slightly confused, but played along. As we turned down the driveway I looked back and saw two guys chasing after us, one with a bat and the other with a knife. We ran up to a house and some old people living there let us in, thankfully. At the time I didn't grasp how fricked up it was that we were getting chased, and I still have no clue why they were. My university was bisected by a big lake, with a bridge going across it with an island gazebo in the middle. One night I was walking down the side of the lake about to cross the bridge to go to a dorm on the other side. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I noticed some kid in a grey-white hoodie, with the hood up, walking across the section of the bridge on my side of the gazebo, towards my sidewalk. I didn't think anything of him, until I walked by a big tree which blocked my line of sight for a second. When I got past the tree, I happened to glance back at the bridge, and there was no one there. He couldn't have possibly walked off the bridge. He would have had to go right by me, and if he had turned around in the split second I couldn't see him, he wouldn't have had any time to get all the way back to the island, either. He was just gone. This gets creepier. About a year later, I was about to tell this story to my friend who had been abroad that semester. He'd never heard it, and before I even got to what I saw, he cut in with, "Wait, did you see a guy in a hoodie disappear?" Yes, he had seen something just like this freshman year. Freaking weird. I hated walking across that bridge alone from there on out. Okay, this is 100% true, even though most people I tell this to in real life don't believe me. When I was really little my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open and said, "See, there's nothing." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing and she said somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me. My dad told her that the police were coming, and she freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. When I was younger we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by she was watching out the windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween one of the cousins dared us to trick or treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging noises in the house, suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the door she had a severed head in her hands and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents' and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived BTW but has a long scar across her neck. Every time I have watched The Lion King someone I know has died. Happened 3 times when I was a child. Always happened the same way. We'd be watching it as a family, and then the phone would ring during the movie and we would receive the news of a relative dying. No one in my family has watched The Lion King since. I don't have any way to verify whether this is actually a family story or whether it's an urban legend. But here, my family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods. So an aunt of some unknown number of greats preceding her relationship to me dies of some disease and she gets buried in the family cemetery under the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral the 2 dogs stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it when, a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave, they were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw and bloody and mangled from wear. On the inside of the casket door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. I'm a kid who likes his sleep very much so my dad often had to wake me up as I slept through my alarm. He wakes me up the same way every time, by gently putting a hand on my shoulder and then since I usually plead for 5 more minutes, he yanks the covers off and forces me up. So a few weeks ago I had to get up very early to go play pickup basketball in the morning with some friends. I set my alarm the night before and went to sleep. My dad works very far away so he often sleeps at work 2 or 3 nights a week and that night he wasn't sleeping at home so I knew I had to get myself up. I eventually fall asleep and I then wake up to a hand on my shoulder, murmur the usual 5 more minutes, and then I feel the covers yanked off me all the way off the bed. I shot up out of bed because it was habit at this point because this is when I knew my dad was serious. I opened my eyes and it was pitch black in my room and nobody was there. I looked around and saw nothing. Just the lights on my clock that said it was 2:30 in the morning. I was a little more than slightly freaked out. I asked my mom in the morning if my dad had came home but she said no, he had stayed at work. Ever since I was really little my family has always encountered really weird ghostly phenomenon. The house we live in now has been the worst by far however with an almost constant stream of events happening. One of the stories that always freaks people out the most is that there was this little girl who knew our names and would approach us all at different times. One night I was asleep and I heard a knocking on my door and a girl's voice saying Dean 2JX open the door let me in I want to play open the door. At first I thought it was my sister but as I woke up I realized it was a much younger girl's voice. I sat there silently, freaking the frick out, until it eventually stopped but just as I was about to go haul butt into my sister's room there was a relentless pounding on the 2 separate doors that enter my room and this little girl screaming with laughter saying I know you're in there. Let me in. After a few minutes I just ended up yelling stop it and then the pounding stopped. The next morning my mom and my sister, who I hadn't told, were talking about strange footsteps and giggling sounds all throughout the house but neither of them had heard any pounding or me yelling. A man walked into my house while I was home alone, called my name, and nearly came upstairs, where I was hiding, but left when my dogs got up. Scary as crap. It was the 11th of October 2001. 1 month after 9/11, I was 14 years old and my grandfather died in his sleep, an empty bottle of whiskey at his bedside. I was devastated. He was the best grandpa, and I could tell I was his favorite. At his funeral I remember standing at his burial ceremony. I was a little farther back than most of our family. I needed my space and I was grieving hard. I then remember closing my eyes, folding my arms and burying my head into my jacket and crying. My mom then put her arm around me and cried with me. I felt her, heard her crying into my cheek, her voice mauled by my jacket. She let go and I opened my eyes. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. My mother was standing 20 feet in front of me. Everyone was. I looked around and realized I was completely alone the whole time. I don't know who hugged me. Maybe it was my grandpa. Maybe I mistook my grandpa's voice for my mother's. To this day I am still confused and a little creeped out. My sister used to claim she saw a lady in a black dress in our stairway when she was little, and my uncle who got divorced and moved in with us said he used to feel like a cat was in the room with him. He claimed he felt a cat jump on the bed at night and knock things off the windowsill. Well, when my dad was redoing the drywall in the stairway he found an old black and white picture of a lady in a black dress with a cat on her lap. Creepy as frick. This is a true story. Me and my roommate, we'll call him Steven, had a pretty big party for his 30th birthday. There's cake, balloons, weed, and booze. We were having a great time when one of Steven's friends tells him he'll give him $100 to go to the casino and gamble, but he has to go gamble with him. My roommate says heck yay. They get ready to leave, so does everyone else, and the party ends. So eventually everyone leaves and it's just me. I clean up a bit, turn all the lights off in the apartment except my bedroom light, get into my nightwear and sit on my bed to watch some TV. As I am sitting there, I keep hearing this dragging noise, followed 15 seconds later by a light plop. This goes on for 25-30 minutes, but I don't see anything out of the ordinary, so I figure maybe it's something going wrong with the fish tank. I keep hearing this for 15 more minutes, thinking nothing of it, when some movement by my bedroom door catches my attention. One of the balloons we used for the party, a big number 0, is sitting at the threshold of my door, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. I just stare at it like WTF. Then, as if on cue, it moves inside my room, dragging the plastic bottom on the ground about half a foot, floats up about a half a foot, floats forward about a foot very slowly, and plops the weight back down on the ground. Then it just sits there, doing nothing, and a few minutes later it would repeat it. All this time I am sitting there horrified. The balloon continues to move toward me and my bed until it plops down right at the edge of my bed and kind of leans in, right in my face. I jumped up and backed way the frick up, searching for a logical explanation for what I just observed. I would pop the crap out of that balloon. I've got 2 stories. One's creepy, one's not so creepy but probably appropriate for here. Here's the first. My mom is the oldest of 6 children, and the oldest 5 are all 2 years apart from each other. So, when she was in high school and 16-17ish, she did a lot of babysitting for her siblings, my aunts and uncles. She's babysitting the family one night in winter, and the phone rings. It's the neighbor across the street. Neighbor tells her don't turn around, but we are looking at your house right now, and we can see you and your siblings watching TV, and we see the back of your head while you're sitting on the sofa. Okay, my mom says, thinking this is really weird. Well, the neighbors say, we also see a man right outside the house staring right into the window of the room you and your siblings are all in. Don't move. Don't do anything. We've already called the cops. Cops show up just a few minutes later. Man fled the scene and was never caught, but being winter, there was a dusting of snow on the ground, and there were footprints all around the house stopping at every window. Here's the second. This one isn't creepy in the scary sense, but in the spine-tingling sense. At least it is for me for obvious reasons. When I was young I had a dream. In the dream I was standing in a giant field of dying knee-high grass, and the field was encircled by a huge range of mountains. It was brilliantly sunny out. There was a path that cut straight through the field. I stood in the middle of the field on the path. In the center of the circle, the path cut straight through both sides of the circling mountains, creating a giant gorge at either end of the circle. I'm trying to describe this as well as possible. Apologies. As I'm standing in the middle of the circle, Out of nowhere my grandfather appears walking towards me. He stops and we have a discussion. It's very nondescript and pretty short but ends with him telling me that he's proud of me and that he needs to get going. We say goodbye and he walks away from me along the path towards the other end. I wake up to the phone ringing. My mom answers it. It's the hospital notifying my parents my grandfather had passed away. My dad tells a story, and I will do the best to recall the details. But my dad was 12 or so and had a cousin that was 8 or so. My dad's aunt had driven down from Louisville for the weekend to visit with the family and brought a kid with her. My dad said that when the kid arrived he told him that he had had a bad dream the night before that we was in a coffin and he couldn't get out. My dad told him not to be silly, and my grandfather and dad were going to the feed mill to pick up a load of grain and he rode with them. On the way they passed the church graveyard and my dad's cousin asked my grandfather that if he were in a coffin would he be buried there. My grandfather laughed and said maybe one of these days but that is a long time off so he shouldn't worry about it. They get the load of feed at the mill and head back to the house. The next day on Sunday they get up and go to church and in Sunday school they had all the kids together and my dad said his cousin asked what it was like to be with Jesus and the teacher tried to continue on with her lesson plan. But then he started to cry and said he needed to know. So she changed and talked about what they thought heaven would be like. After church he was crossing the road to the parking lot and was hit by a car and killed. My dad and grandfather will say it's almost like he knew he was going to die then. Gives me the shivers a bit. You have been visited by the cat doctor. Comment cat health to get good health and do not get sick. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.